But here we are, back at it. So to those of you who are new, the title of this live is called Big Swings in Betting on Yourself, from Teacher to Solopreneur. So basically, the aim of this session today is to talk a little bit about my career. What has my career been like? How have I gone from, being a kid living in Brazil to working around the world? How did I go from, quitting my full-time job as a university lecturer to actually end up working for myself? Thank you, Yom Zarat. Those are very kind words. Why was I willing to do all these crazy things? Why was I willing to leave the safety of a comfort job to eventually just kind of like work for myself? So if you are a teacher and you are not so sure about whether or not you want to make this transition, you want to make this leap from actually working for someone to working for yourself, stick around. I think this live is going to be very informative, especially because a lot of teachers, myself included, we have all been somewhat brainwashed or somewhat trained to actually work for someone. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. I'm going to be talking about how I went from, the kinds of jobs that I've had and how taking risks throughout my life led me to where I am today. How I basically managed my teaching career and built my life as a solopreneur. And how currently I am working on three or four, I can't remember. As I explain this, you will have a much better idea. How I went from, like I said, how I went from working for someone, quitting my university job to actually working for myself, how I managed my teaching career, and how I built my life as a solopreneur, and how now I actually don't depend on any jobs to actually make a living. So if you are a teacher and you're scared, if you are a teacher and you work for a company and you've been thinking about making this transition, then as I said, stick around, because I think you're going to find this live very informative in that sense. And of course, as usual, if you have any questions, do not hesitate. I don't have any problems with people asking me personal questions, okay? Before we get started, this live is being sponsored by our program, the Teacher Accelerator Program, or TAP. And basically what the TAP does is teach you everything that myself, Andrew, and Mike have gone through. How we have gone from working at universities, how we have gone from working for someone to actually building our own business, how we have gone from working for someone to being solopreneur. So if you are a teacher and you want to learn more about the pedagogical side, if you are a teacher and you want to learn more about the business side, and if you are a teacher and you want to learn more about the course design side, then this is exactly what the Teacher Accelerator does. It actually is more of a triangle that connects the pedagogy to the business to the course design aspect. So that's the reality. Liliane Carvalho is saying here that she's scared. It's very normal. It's very normal to feel scared, but I will talk a little bit more about that. So if you're interested in learning more about the TAP, of course, you can always send us a message and we will get in touch with you and we can schedule a call to talk more about your current situation and whether or not you would be a good fit for the program. And as I've said before, the program is not an open program. Not everyone can join. We actually have to feel like we could offer you a chance to join the program. So without further ado, let's get the ball rolling. And I'm going to get the ball rolling by addressing some of the questions that people have sent before I started this live. And there were three interesting questions that I received. The first one is related to whether or not people have been glamorizing entrepreneurship or going solo. I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The second question that somebody asked me very recently here on the page was what helped me transition from working for someone to working for myself. So let's get the ball rolling here. I'll tell you a little bit about my career. Of course, I'm not going to get into details. If you want me to talk about certain details, you can always type up here on in the comments, and I will probably address your question to the best of my knowledge. Okay, so let's go back to 1999, which is exactly when I started teaching. I didn't want to teach. I never wanted to become a teacher. I don't think I was born a teacher. I liked educating. I like educating myself. I liked learning, but I never wanted to teach anyone. It was never really in my radar to become a teacher. I wanted to be a musician. That was kind of my dream. But then I realized that I didn't want to pay the price. And this is an interesting point, this idea of paying the price, because everything you do in your life, it's going to have a price. And of course, I'm talking about a price metaphorically here. What was the price of me becoming a musician? Well, the price of being a musician meant that I would have to travel a lot with the band. It meant that I would have to rehearse a lot with the band. It meant that I would have to spend a lot of time with a bunch of dudes playing music. It also meant that I wouldn't be making a lot of money in to begin with. And it also meant that I wouldn't be able to know whether or not I would succeed or make a living as a musician. So whenever when I looked at those questions, when I asked myself those questions, and I realized that that was the price that I had to pay, I thought, you know what, this is actually not for me. And eventually I went to university, I studied languages, and eventually I started teaching in 1999. And of course I was working for someone else. And throughout my career, I worked in language education in many different capacities. I've taught literature, I've taught English, I've taught philosophy, I've taught writing, and I've taught Portuguese even, and I don't think I'm a very good Portuguese teacher if you ask me. But those are the things that I've done. So I followed the very regular path, working for private institutions, working for high schools, working in secondary education, and then eventually I worked at a couple of universities and colleges in Brazil. And then of course after that I decided that I needed a new challenge. I never felt like I was being fully challenged while living there. So I decided that I had to do something different. Yes, Jomzarat, I do speak Portuguese. So that's when I decided that I wanted to live abroad. I wanted to do different things. And eventually I got a job in, I had a short stint in Argentina also teaching English, but then after that I also spent some time in the United States working in an educational company, but not really teaching. And that job was actually selling books door to door, believe it or not. And as you can guess, I didn't really sell many books because I was a terrible salesperson. Eventually I quit and I moved to a different place in the United States, and then eventually I enrolled in a university class. I applied for a master's. Eventually I got into the master's program, but I decided not to stay, not to enroll in the program or continue with the program, because I just didn't want to stay in the United States. I went back to Brazil, I spent a little time there, and then eventually I moved to Canada, and that was in 2003, 2004. And of course, when I first moved to Canada, I couldn't really get a job teaching English because I didn't have what the so-called Canadian experience. So of course, I had to find a way to survive. So I worked a bunch of odd jobs, and because my name is Leonardo, I decided to work as a painter. And then of course, I decided that I didn't ever wanted to give up teaching because I really liked teaching. So what I decided to do after that was, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to volunteer on the weekends so I can still kind of like teach and develop my teaching chops, if I could say that. And of course, I was working on the weekends. I was working teaching a group of Korean ladies and also immigrants at two different churches. And this is how I kind of like, I think that was my first taste of Dog Me without even knowing. This is 2004. Dog Me, the book only came out in 2009 or 2010. So this is way before Dog Me was even a thing, because when I was teaching, yes, painter, musician, teacher, I also worked in construction. So I've done a little bit of everything just so that I could survive. So that was my first my first experience with dog meat was back in 2004, working on the weekends at these two very specific churches as a volunteer. And I had a class of like old Korean ladies, and all they wanted to do was to talk. So basically that's what I had to do. And on Sundays I would teach at a different church, but basically working with a lot of immigrants that were new to Canada. But in the meantime, I was also, developing myself. I was applying for jobs. I was rejected. I think I applied for at least that year, 2004. I think I applied for at least 20 to 30 different jobs. And I was rejected in all of those teaching jobs. Primarily because, again, I didn't have teaching experience in Canada, even though I had done some work teaching in 3 other countries, United States, Argentina, and Brazil. So, of course, I didn't get a job, but I eventually started networking. I would go to conferences. I would present at conferences. I think I presented at my first conference in 2006. And of course, when you present at conferences, you meet people, you network, and of course, you gain a lot of experience. And at one of these workshops, one of these conferences, I met someone who said, "Oh, I really liked your presentation. I just opened an ESL school in Toronto, and we're kind of growing, and I would like to hire you as a teacher." And I said, "Hey, I'd love to come by and know more about the facilities and the curriculum that you had." So when I got to that school, and this is like 2000, when was that? That was like 2006, I think, 2007. Yes. I worked at this school, and when I got there, I realized that the school didn't really have a real curriculum. What they had was basically a bunch of textbooks. And of course, they had all the regular levels, and teachers would teach from a textbook. And I always said, I think we should try to actually, help teachers develop by not using a textbook. And eventually, after working there for about 4 years, I became a director of studies, and then I became the campus director, and kind of grew within that school. I worked at a bunch of other schools, also part-time in the evenings. So I was teaching during the day at one school, teaching in the evenings at a different school. I was also going through a divorce at the time. I had two little kids, and it was, as you can see, was quite challenging. I was still, trying to attend conferences, present at conferences. But I was always, I think the most important lesson for me from that time is that no one is going to give you anything you don't deserve. And when I first started this whole solopreneur journey, all I wanted was for me to kind of throw me a bone. I want someone to give me a chance. I wanted somebody to help me, but I was very naive. The only way for you to really get anyone to actually give you things is when you're actually trying to build your own brand, when you're actually trying to build yourself, when you're actually trying to build your business. So you can show that you can give them to yourself. So when I was young and a young teacher and all that, I was basically some sort of an investment. Everything was an investment for me. So I was constantly investing in my career. And eventually, of course, as I said, I worked as a director of studies. I eventually became, I kind of ventured into teacher training, never took a course to become a teacher trainer. I just basically, I was reading extensively, learning as much as I could possibly learn from books that I was reading at the time, also going through a divorce, as I've mentioned. And I was at that school, and I was, of course, presenting at a lot of conferences. And I kind of started building my own brand. And I think that's the interesting thing about solopreneurship is what you're doing basically. And I think at that time we didn't have Instagram. But basically what you have to think about Instagram is a wonderful tool for you to develop as a teacher because you're creating content. And a lot of teachers don't see this, but when you're creating content, you're basically given an opportunity to actually externalize and to exercise your own abilities as a teacher, because creating a post is actually a work of art. It's almost like writing a blog. It's almost like writing a post. It's almost like writing a mini essay. And I see a lot of teachers who don't want to do that kind of work, So your posts are somewhat a reflection of the kind of teacher that you are. So if you go into the Learn Your English page, we have about 850 posts. And I think I created pretty much 840 of these posts. Pretty much most of these posts were created by me. And I think back in the day, I didn't have Instagram. So the only way for me to externalize my thoughts and to get my ideas out there was through a workshop. So I would study something, I would learn something, I say, you know what, I want to offer a workshop at a certain place or at a certain conference, and that's how I developed. But now with Instagram, you have this wonderful opportunity, and I'm seeing here a comment from Fernanda. Yes, teachers paying other teachers to create posts. That is ludicrous, that's ridiculous. That actually tells me that you're not really into teaching. You're just in this because you're trying to make a quick buck. And let me tell you one thing, if you're in education to make a quick buck, good luck with that. Good luck with that. I think people now have become much smarter and much more intelligent to actually sniff things and know when somebody is just trying to make a quick buck. It's very easy to spot a charlatan when you see one here on social media. So that's kind of what happened. And of course, always presenting, traveling to present at conferences, training. And again, as I said, a lot of this was my opportunity to network, to develop as a teacher. And eventually in 2013, I think it was 2013, I was offered an opportunity to work at a software company that was developing content for a software back in the day when we used disks to create software for schools, for companies. This company scouted me and they said, hey, we would like to invite you to come and do work for us. And I said, hey, it's materials writing. I'm in. I want to do that because I had already done work creating curriculum for the school. I had already done work as a teacher trainer. I had already done work presenting and doing continuous professional development for different schools. So I had already gained a wide range of experience doing different things in language education in different capacities. And I said, okay, so what's the next challenge for me? Well, the next challenge is actually work for this company, developing content to be used in a software. And this is exactly what I decided to do. So when I informed the school that I was leaving, they didn't want me to leave. So we kind of had an arrangement that I would work for this company for 3 months. And if I wasn't happy, I would come back. But I knew deep down that the moment I was leaving that school, I knew I wasn't going to come back to that school. I knew this was going to lead me to different heights, to different opportunities. And this is exactly what happened. I worked there for about 3 months, and while I was working there, and it was a really well-paid position, but I wasn't really enjoying it. Why? Because I still had someone telling me what to do. I still had someone with much less experience, with no knowledge of language education or second language acquisition, telling me what to do. So eventually I said, maybe I should work for a university. That was always my dream. I said I really wanted to work for a university or a college in Canada. I think this is going to be perhaps the most important step in my professional career. And this is exactly what happened. Eventually I got an invitation to work at a university in Canada, and of course I was elated when that happened. But again, I was there for a period of time, and eventually after working there for a few years, and as I said, making a decent wage, I should say, I eventually realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do. But there's something that happened in between that I think it's important for me to mention before I jump right into the solopreneur part. In 2016, when I decided to leave that school where I was a director of studies and campus director, I eventually started venturing into a consultancy. So I decided to kind of do my own thing. I wanted to work as a consultant for schools. And that's something that started in 2015. So I didn't know much about consultancy. So I kind of learned about consultancy from observing other consultants. And I had a mentor at the time, someone that was highly critical of my work and played a very I guess I would say it played a pivotal role in my development as not only as a teacher, as an educator, but it was someone that I looked up to, and he was just a great guy to hang out with, and he helped me a lot in that sense. So I learned a lot about that consultancy aspect from him, even though I didn't think he did a very good job with his own consulting business. But that's how I kind of like started venturing into being a solopreneur, because I was working at the university, I was building my consulting company, and I was still working part-time as a language advisor, as an advisor for the school that I used to work at. So eventually I said, okay, there's too many jobs happening here. I want to do a master's, maybe get into a PhD, because now I'm in university. Maybe that's exactly what I want to do now. Pinnacle, that's the word, the pinnacle of my career. Yes, or the apex of my career. Anyway, so I wasn't sure what to do next, but I really liked working for myself. I really liked traveling to schools. I really liked observing teachers, and I had an opportunity to observe like hundreds and hundreds of lessons when I was working as a consultant. I had the opportunity to see a lot of different textbooks and realize how most of them are exactly the same crap. And yeah, so that's exactly what happened there. And I just said, okay, so I'm working at the university, so maybe I want to venture into academia. So I started doing my master's. It was a master's with a PhD, and eventually I was, doing my master's, working at the university, but also having my consulting business. And that's when, in 2016, 2017, that's when I realized, I said, okay, you know what? I kind of want to have my own English side hustle. And that's when in 2016, I founded Learn Your English. Learn Your English started as a side thing, as a side hustle. To those of you who don't know the story, this is kind of it. So I had my consulting business. I was working with Learn Your English, building Learn Your English by myself on the side, working at a university and doing my master's.